1960s Interview Project, featuring Lena Hegevel, by Chris Clark. For my project, I interviewed my aunt from Sweden. Because she wasn't from the US, I asked her a lot of questions about what was going on in Sweden in the 1960s. Additionally, I also asked her the perspective she had and what others had in Sweden at the time about America. She began by speaking about what she thought was the most important change in Sweden at the time, which was how they began to drive on the right side of the road, which had already been adopted by most countries in the world. She then spoke about what she felt was the second biggest change in Sweden at the time, which was how any kid who went to school in Sweden would get free food for lunch. After asking her about some of the changes in the 1960s and what life was like, I moved on to ask her about what she thought of the USA. I was surprised to find out that even in Sweden, after asking her about the US, they had all heard about the death of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and many things about the Vietnam War.
Demonstrationer och folk gick med plakater för att översätta. Det var ju stora demonstrationer.
I found it very interesting that even in Sweden, halfway across the world, John F. Kennedy's death was a huge deal, and everybody was hearing about it on the radio and on TV.
70.
It was amazing to listen to her speak about how the color TV was such a new invention at the time, and how most people didn't have them, except how her grandparents were one of the first people in her town to get a color TV. And at the time, all of the people in the town would come over to her grandparents' house to be able to watch some of the first TV shows, including one of the most popular at the time, Bonanza. She was so enthusiastic talking about Bonanza, which in Swedish was called Bredden och Korträtt. She felt like enacting the entire theme song.
In English, because that's not what it's called in. Yeah.
Bonanza.
Ja.
I then asked if she had known if Sweden was or was not involved in what was known as the arms race at the time, or if Sweden was trying to develop nuclear bombs like many other countries in the World War. But she said because Sweden had always remained neutral, they were not trying to develop any weapons at the time. I was very surprised to see how many different things my aunt knew about what was going on in the US, all because of the TV and the radio. She went on to say how she had heard about and realized that it was a big deal, the relation between US and Cuba at the time. She said that there were a few things that people in Sweden would hear on the radio and on TV that would worry them, including the Vietnam War, the Berlin Wall, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. People were worried that nuclear weapons would actually be fired. I was surprised to hear that after listening to my aunt talk about how much she had heard on the TV about what was going on in the US, that she had no idea and had not even heard of the Cold War. Even though she had not heard about the Cold War, she said she had a very strong opinion regarding the Vietnam War. She herself had very much hated it when she was a child, and said most people in Sweden were completely against what the US was doing in Vietnam. I then began to ask about what life was like in Sweden at the time, and my aunt responded by saying that life was great in Sweden and not many people felt the need to move. Like she had heard from many other countries, there were so many immigrants flooding to America from all these other countries looking for a better life. But in Sweden, many people stayed. Life was great, the economy was booming, and there weren't really any problems with civil rights. Because Sweden is a socialistic country, my aunt was saying that there were virtually no poor people at the time. This was surprising to me because in the US there was a huge problem with underpaid people and people who barely were able to survive at the time because of how little money they received from working. Even though she was saying that nobody came to the US from Sweden in search of a better life, she did say that many people went to the US for the Woodstock Festival.
Yeah.
The last thing she mentioned about the 1960s was that this was a time where many people started getting basic amenities that many people didn't have before, like a bathroom, electricity, and warm water. Overall, the life in the 1960s in Sweden was great.